In a counting house in Paris, a clerk lifts the lid of a sealed box that has just crossed the channel from London. Inside it should be gold. Bars and coin weighed, recorded, and locked behind a pair of patent safes that almost nobody on Earth could open. Instead, he is looking at lead. Small gray pellets poured into the exact weight of the gold that should have been there. The seals are intact. The locks were never forced. Somewhere between London and the sea, on a train moving through the night, a fortune turned into lead. No broken door, no witness, no alarm. To understand the theft, you first have to understand the pride. In the 1850s, Britain was wiring itself together with iron, and the railway was the symbol of a modern, ordered, trustworthy nation. One of the things it sold above all was security. The Southeastern Railway ran a service that mattered to the whole financial world. Each day gold left the bullion houses of London, traveled from London Bridge Station down to the coast at Folkestone, crossed by Channel steamer to Boulogne, and went on toward Paris. These were the twin hearts of European money, and this was the artery between them. The gold did not just sit in a sack. It traveled inside iron safes bolted into the guard's van. Those safes used patent detector locks, the kind built by the most famous lockmakers in the country, and each one took 2 separate keys. The gold itself sat inside iron-bound boxes, riveted shut and sealed with wax by the firms that shipped it. The whole design rested on one idea. If anyone tampered with the gold, it would show. The seals would break. The weight would be wrong. The locks could not be picked. So here is the question that hangs over everything that follows. How do you steal a fortune from a moving train and leave the locks, the seals, and the weight all looking untouched? The answer began not with a crowbar, but with 4 men who understood that the strongest part of any system is also the part you can buy, flatter, or copy. The brain was Edward Auger, just under 40, a professional thief since the age of 18, recently returned from years in Australia and America. At his trial, the judge himself would call his talents extraordinary. His partner was William Pierce, around 37, once a clerk for the railway until dismissed over gambling, who knew the company from the inside. But they could not beat locks and rosters alone, so they recruited 2 insiders. James Burgess was a trusted guard who had worked the Folkestone line since it opened in 1843, often the man in charge of the bullion trains. His good reputation was the plan. The 4th man was William Tester, an educated, ambitious clerk in the traffic department at London Bridge. From that desk, he could see the guards' rosters, so he could place Burgess on the right train, and crucially, he could get his hands on the keys. This is the part of the story that took the longest. Through 1854, the gang solved the problem of the keys one impression at a time. Tester got hold of the safe keys briefly, and Auger took wax impressions, by some accounts in a quiet beer house on Tooley Street, then had copies cut and filed until they were exact. A lost key at Folkestone the previous summer, and a routine reconditioning of the locks had each opened a small window. But each safe took 2 keys, and the second proved harder. The break came at the Folkestone office. When a boat came in, the staff were busy, and for a short time a key was left where it could be reached. Pierce got the impression he needed. Then came the discipline that separates the amateur from the professional. They did not rush to use the keys. Through the spring of 1855, Auger rode the line on ordinary journeys, quietly testing the copies on the real safes, again and again, until they turned cleanly every single time. By May, they had working keys to a system that was supposed to be unbeatable. All they needed now was the right train, and a way to put the weight back. For the weight, they went to the shot tower at Lambeth, where lead was dropped molten from a great height to form perfect round pellets. There they bought roughly 200 weight of lead shot, around 220 pounds of it. Not to use as a weapon, to use as a counterfeit. Pound for pound, the lead would take the exact place of the gold, so that no scale anywhere along the route would ever ring an alarm. The trap was built. Now they only had to wait for the gold to walk into it. On the evening of the 15th of May, 1855, Edward Auger waited near London Bridge Station. Tester had done his quiet work with the rosters, so the man in charge of the guard's van that night was their own man, James Burgess. The signal was simple, almost invisible. Burgess came out of the station and wiped his face with a white handkerchief. That was all it meant. Tonight the gold is aboard. Auger slipped into the guard's van and hid, covered by Burgess's own overalls. As the train pulled out into the dark Kentish countryside, Pierce joined them along the way, and on a train running at speed toward the coast, the 3 men went to work. The copied keys opened the safes exactly as they had in every rehearsal. They knocked the rivets and the iron fastenings off the boxes, lifted out the gold bars, and in one box hundreds of gold coins, and in its place poured the lead shot, carefully matching the weight each box was recorded to carry. Then they put the boxes back together, replaced the fastenings, And where the wax seals had been, they used a homemade dye to imitate the impression, so the boxes looked as if no hand had ever touched them. The work was staged across the journey, leg by leg, with gold carried off in courier-style bags hidden under their cloaks. At Folkestone, the boxes were carried onto the steamer for Boulogne, then on toward Paris. Every man who handled them lifted the correct weight. Every seal looked right. Every lock was closed. There was no moment of discovery, no alarm bell. The crime traveled all the way to Paris before anyone knew it had happened, and only when the boxes were opened was the gold found to be lead. Now came the part the gang had counted on: confusion. The English authorities insisted the gold was switched in France. The French insisted it was switched in England. While the two sides argued over the channel, the trail went cold and a reward notice led nowhere. The plan was, in the language of the day, perfect, and for almost a year and a half it held. No detective cracked this case. What destroyed the perfect robbery was the oldest weakness of all. The thieves did not trust each other, and one of them broke a promise to a woman. The gold had to be turned into untraceable money. Some was melted down at Ager's house, Cambridge Villa, and Shepherd's Bush. Some was sold quietly through a fence. The men were rich and careful, and for a long while they were safe. Then chance turned on Ager. In September of 1855, he was arrested on an entirely unrelated charge of passing a forged check, convicted, and sentenced to transportation for life. The gold robbery was not even mentioned. As far as the law knew, he was simply a forger going to the other side of the world. Ager had a partner, Fanny Kay, and a young child. Facing transportation for life, he did something almost honorable. He arranged through a solicitor for around £3,000 of his own money to be passed to Pierce, with one instruction: look after Fanny and the child. Pierce kept the money and abandoned them completely, and that single act of greed is what brought down the most ingenious robbery of the age. Fanny Kay, betrayed and destitute, went to the authorities and told them what she knew. The company's solicitor interviewed Ager in prison, and when he learned how Pierce had treated the woman he had tried to protect, the careful professional turned. Investigators went to Cambridge Villa and found the proof written into the house itself: burnt floorboards and traces of gold worked into the hearth. Pierce and Burgess were arrested in November of 1856. Tester gave himself up that December. In January of 1857, the case reached the Old Bailey before Mr. Justice Martin. Ager and Fanny Kay told the court everything. The jury is said to have taken about 10 minutes, and all three men were found guilty. The sentences tell you something about the law of the time. William Pierce, who had organized so much of it, received only 2 years of hard labor because he was no longer a railway servant and his crime counted as ordinary theft. Burgess and Tester, the trusted insiders, were each sentenced to 14 years of penal transportation and later shipped to Western Australia. Ager, already condemned, was never retried because he was the witness who had sunk the others. The gold was never fully recovered. Most had been melted and scattered into the ordinary money of the city before anyone knew it was missing. So return one last time to the question we began with. How do you steal a fortune from a moving train and leave the locks, the seals, and the weight all untouched? Now you know. You do not attack the iron. You attack the trust around it. You copy the keys instead of breaking the locks. You replace the weight instead of hiding the loss. You buy the men who guard it. The Southeastern Railway had built a system almost flawless in steel and wax, beaten without a single lock forced. The perfect robbery did not fail because the plan was flawed. It failed because human beings were exactly what they have always been: